Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited. I've been reading your book for like the last 3 months or so. And on the back of the book, it actually says you're a preacher, teacher, scholar, best-selling author of more than 50 books, and listed regularly among the most influential Christians in the United States. So that's something. So really appreciate you being here. And I mean, the book is so amazing. I was almost feeling like, you know, when you read scripture and you say, God, speak to me, and you open it up and just like scroll through, and whatever the finger points, okay, I hope you're speaking to me right here. That's almost how I feel with your book, because I mean, I have highlighted page after page, thought after thought, idea after idea. So I highlighted some of the key takeaways that I have.
Okay.
And one of them, where I want to start, it's right here. It says, conversation partners need the freedom to look foolish and say foolish things across the table. Tables breed stories, and narrative is the healing balm of the wounds of the world. People are living storybooks, and anything that opens the covers of the path towards healing. I love that quote, and I think that's almost what I'm trying to do with the Christian podcast. I'm trying to bring conversations to the table, you know. So I'm sitting across the world with people and asking them questions and learning about them, learning their ideas. When you were writing the book at the very beginning, you say you're writing for the 22nd century. You're writing for the future. So tell me a little bit about your experience writing the book with that in mind, the conversation, the table, the future, the 22nd century.
Well, the 22nd century comes out of the concept that my best friend in the whole world, when she was alive, she was born in 1897 and she died in 2003. In other words, she lived in 3 centuries. And if you have a kid born between 1990 and 2000, especially a female, they have greater than 50% chance of living well into the 22nd century. So our kids, the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population percentage-wise, are centenarians, people over 100. So just statistically speaking, from a demographic standpoint, you know, our kids are really, we ought to think of them as 22nd century kids, not 21st century. 22nd century kid. So if we think we've seen changes in the last 20 years and are facing enormities of challenges, then we haven't seen anything yet compared to what they're going to be seeing. So that's why I use that 22nd century kind of concept and metaphor. I also, I mean, your point about the quote that you used, for me, and I don't think I used this in the book, but maybe I did. I don't remember. But the Spanish have this great concept of sobremesa.
Oh yeah.
Sobremesa, and it means over the table. SOBREMESA, over the table, and then there's SOBRA. MESA, which means after the table. But sobremesa is, you would insult your host if after the close of a meal you got up and left, because part of the meal itself is conversation. Part of it itself is that kind of sharing stories that takes place after the meal is over, and so that's what I'm trying to do with this book, and what you're trying to do with this podcast too, is create these over the table conversations where people just enjoy each other. I was excited about that Spanish word. I was going to lock it in as a URL, you know, and so I went to look up who had the sobremesa, and you know who has sobremesa.com? A cigar company, because they make sobremesa cigars just for conversation after the meal. And
wow.
They're about 35, 40-minute cigars. And That's supposed to be a cigar that lasts long enough to get you talking and get you enjoying one another. But that's what we've lost. We've lost the sobremesa. Everything is now about just feeding our face, fast food. That we've lost. But I don't know we've lost a table, sitting down at the table together. But we've lost the sobremesa.
Wow.
And then the SOBRA, sobremesa, is after. I mean, there's always leftovers at Jesus. You look at everything Jesus did. I mean, the reading for this coming week is the feeding of the 5,000, which is really 20,000. But he leaves leftovers. His first miracle at Cana of Galilee, he left leftovers, all this leftover wine. Jesus always provides an abundance, an extravagance. Take some home. So what are the takeouts, the take homes, the conversations that we take with us? And so the Spanish, these two Spanish words, SOBRE, MESA, and SOBRA, MESA, are for me key to the future.
Wow, I love it. Sobremesa and sobremesa. So good, man. And I love the fact that you're acknowledging, the Spanish word. And this podcast is being heard around the world. And I think, of course, we're in the United States right now, but I come from Mexico, from Guadalajara, Jalisco. And I think, in a sense, we are creating these tables now across the world, for people to listen across the world. And now I want to go to one of your almost like last pages in the book, in your acknowledgments. And
You read my acknowledgments?
Yeah. It's so interesting, right?
I'm
when
impressed.
You start.
Nobody reads my acknowledgments.
I did, man. It's so good. Well, especially like the second paragraph, you're talking about one of the hardest parts of this book to write was the requiem of the American dream, the degradation of that dream. So tell me about that, because in the book, you cover so much, and I'm just going to mention a little bit of the contents for people that are listening. Hot zones, hostile culture, Chinafication, world religions, especially Islam, the public square, which is the idea of the table. I think you mentioned it there. The disuniting states of America. You talk about tolerance, of diversity, esteeming incarcerations, race relations, suicide culture. And then you talk about kind of like this technological moments of solutionism, dataism, generic engineering. You call it or I don't know if it's your term, but it's the grain. Generic engineering, robotics, artificial intelligence, information technology, nanotechnology. The contents of the book is so amazing, so phenomenal, because you're covering more than 25 volcanoes that are about to erupt in the world. But what do you feel? You're saying here that it was hard for you to write about this requiem of the American dream. And yeah. I don't know if now COVID, is that accelerating things? How do you see that in relating to what's happening now in America?
Yeah, well, two things that based on just what you said. Number one, this book was once twice as long as it is, Beto. I had 50 volcanoes.
Wow.
And so they cut it in half.
Wow.
So literally half of my book is gone. Half of the volcanoes are gone. So in some ways, you've been spared a much larger book and much larger torture. But the hardest part for me, I'm born in America. I'm bred in America. I know that God is not an American, in spite of what some people think, that we have a God of all nations. But you ought to be proud of your birth country, And so it was hard for me to write about the working title for that chapter was "The Eagle Has Fallen." Wow. And what's happening is that the United States is coming apart. The dream is shattered, and it's fracturing, and it's fragmenting, and people are pulling apart. We are living in two different nations. We got a CNN nation and a Fox nation, and the whole pulling apart of this American dream, and it was just very difficult for me to write this, and some of the things that I talked about, how you were going to have more and more secessionist movements. I mean, here I lived close to Seattle. There was a whole group of people that took over 6 square blocks of the city of Seattle and said, we're going to secede and form our own nation. And they called it Chaz, and they formed they wanted to create a whole. You're going to see that over and over in this country. I mean, and it's not going to be fun to be a part of. So this was a very difficult chapter for me to write, because, God cares as much for a child in Biafra as Brazil as in Buffalo, New York. I mean, those children are all equal in God's eyes. But you do have a certain tenderness towards, I'm a patriot. I mean, I love the nation in which I was born, and to see it come apart like this, and to realize that my kids will not live in that same nation that I grew up was very hard for me to write.
Wow. I think people listening from around the world, I don't know if they can relate to what's happening here in America or not. I don't really travel much, and all I know is really, my family still lives in Mexico, and I can see similar narratives going on in Mexico from friends and family that live there, and even people coming here to live in the United States. What did you say? Sorry?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's a global phenomenon. And see, the world's going 2 directions at the same time. It's getting more global, but it's also getting more local. It's getting more tribal. And so, your place where you now live, your home, and the COVID is only enhancing this, because home now is everything. And so we're going, there's no middle anymore, and nation states are middle structures. So people they're having a global identity and identifying on a global level, or else they're identifying on their neighborhood and their zip code or their code. And so that's exactly the direction in which the future is going, both extremes.
Yes. And I think when I used to think of America, coming from Mexico, living in Mexico, growing up in Mexico, there's just so much influence coming from this nation, right? Around the world. I mean, you can see it with, globalism brought, I mean, I remember McDonald's in Mexico in the 80s. We started having the first McDonald's in my city. When we never heard of that, we didn't even know what McDonald's was, right? And then you start having McDonald's, Burger Kings, like all these restaurants, right? Now you go to Mexico and you can find Starbucks. I mean, Walmart's, Targets, like all these businesses that are everywhere now, right? But America has always been so influential, especially in the last century. So influential in how the world sees itself, that it's almost that whatever happens in America has a ripple effect around the world, right? And I have a friend who's from Turkey, and she came to America almost like fleeing from her nation with her parents. She was a little girl. Now she's in her 40s or so. And as I was even like reading the book to her, a few of your quotes and stuff, and this is just a little interesting. She was like, wow, that's exactly how I feel, with some of the quotes that I was telling her. And she's like, please ask him, where should I move? What am I going to do? Like, I came to America, like, looking for all these freedoms, and now we're so disunited. What am I going to do? Am I supposed to, like, move somewhere else now? What do you think?
Well, no, if we're a follower of Jesus, we live in the kingdom. We live in the jubilee of joy of Jesus's presence. So that's what we do wherever we are. And Paul said it here: whatever state I'm in, therewith to be content. And he didn't mean state by nation state, but I kind of interpret it. I play with it that way. That whatever country we're in, whatever government we're in, whatever. That we find the contentment which is not found in government. It's found in Christ and in the shalom of Jesus and in that jubilee joy that he promised to bring, which we call the kingdom. So that's where we live. We live in the kingdom, and we create a home that reflects that. I mean, our home ought to reflect that that jubilee joy of that kingdom. So I'm not optimistic about. I mean, I think we're increasingly going to be persecuted as followers of Jesus, and this
You're not planning to move.
No. I'm preparing my kids for what is coming, and I mean, I already live in the Pacific Northwest here, and if you say you're a Christian here, you will pay for it in some way. Wow. I mean, this culture, and you're in Costa Mesa, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, there is not, this culture is not, oh, Christians, we love you. You know?
That's true. Yeah, and
we're not here. We're not, man. We're not. It's all, they're all away games now, Beto. The home court advantage is gone. We're playing away games, and the crowds are not cheering for Christians to win or even say anything or even be on the field. They don't want to even see us. So this is a whole new world for us. But this exciting thing is because we're back now to the first century, how we began. And that's what I was trying to suggest with this book. How do we prepare ourselves for this culture that is forming out there, which is a mission field? It's literally a mission field. And I don't think, this idea that America is shaping the future, it's not the West anymore, it's the East. Mm-hmm. The East is where, that's where the sun is. The sun is setting in the West. It's rising in the East.
Wow.
And if you want to know the future, you don't look to the West anymore. You look to the East. And I mean, just in terms of technology, I go to Japan, I go to Korea, South Korea, they are so far advanced technologically in every aspect. I mean, I stay at a hotel in South Korea, in Seoul, and I'm, everything there is so much more advanced than any hotel, even a Ritz-Carlton in the U.S. I mean, so we in the West are sucking on a lot of old balloon juice. But we think we're so far advanced. So you want to see the future form, you got to go to the East and see what's forming there.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. You have a chapter called Chinafication, and you actually, I think it's there where you said, if you want to get your kids ready, have them learn Spanish and Mandarin, right? So I think I'm glad that I have at least my kids covered with English and Spanish. But I was thinking of like, wow, wouldn't it be so awesome if they would learn Mandarin? I have no connections at all. Like I have no idea, anything as it relates to China in terms of like, family or relationships with anything from there. So I mean, other than products I buy all the time, right?
Exactly. Well, when I was in China, I'd been there a couple times, and I did not want to tell them in kindergarten, a Chinese child learns English. I mean, it's a requirement. You just because they figure the number one sparring partner and trading partner of the future is going to be, English speaking peoples. And so we've got to learn to speak English to be on a par with them. Mm-hmm. They fully expected that in the U.S., every 5-year-old was learning Mandarin. And I did not have the courage to tell them, it's not happening. It's not happening.
Wow.
But as I suggest in the book, there are these 3 world languages: Spanish, English, and Mandarin. And even to know 2 of the 3 is huge. So you all are way up here with Spanish and English. To learn the Spanish language and English and Mandarin is the trifecta. I mean, the future is at your feet if you can do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Leo, just going back a little bit to the idea of hostile culture, and you were mentioning, some of the things we're experiencing. I mean, you in Seattle and here in Costa Mesa. I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm sure you've heard of him, this guy named Greg Laurie. He's got it's called Harvest Crusade. It's it's a gathering at the stadium where he pretty much gives a sermon and invites people to follow Christ, right? And it's massive. I mean, 60,000 people or so. And he was actually doing like all the marketing for this event that happens in Anaheim, California, at the Angel Stadium. And some of the banners that he had were in this next city called Irvine.
Yeah.
And they got taken down because the city said, we don't want your banners. We don't care if you're going to pay us whatever millions to have them there, because people have complained that they get offended because you have a Bible in your hands, right? And I mean, it's a picture where he acknowledges, yes, it's a Bible, even though it doesn't say Holy Bible or anything like that. It could be any book.
Yeah.
But he got him taken down because it's offensive to the people around there. And then this other thought I was thinking of, I don't know if you're familiar with there's this other pastor named Francis Chan, who had a mega church in Northern California, quit the church. He felt like he needed to do some groundwork and not really cater to the consumeristic type of church. Well, he ended up moving to China last year. He said, you know what, I'm a little done with all the pastors in America trying to fish on the same pond. He went to China. He says, people are eager. They're begging me to tell them about Christ. And I love that, because in your book where you talk about the hostile culture and Chinification, and maybe even this idea that I don't know if to call it the revival or something like that may not come from America, right? It may come from China.
I don't think it will. Exactly right. But God can do whatever God wants to do. So I'm always ready to be surprised. But yeah, it's where God's really at work. I mean, we may be seeing right now, and Francis is testifying to this, the greatest kind of revival in the history of Christianity taking place in China, both underground and above ground. And we can't, just like you can't trust the COVID-19 statistics coming out of China, you can't trust any statistics coming out of there. But when I was over there, the interest in Jesus, the interest in faith was just explosive, Beto. So I'm really going to be surprised if we don't see some. Indonesia. I mean, here is the largest Muslim nation in the world, and in Surabaya, the second largest city in Indonesia after Jakarta, there are churches, Christian churches, that are exploding with the gospel and exploding in neighborhoods, and so we are so focused on what's happening here in North America that we're missing the larger picture of what God is doing in some very surprising places, like the Muslim nation of Indonesia, like the Chinese Marxist nation of China.
Wow. Yeah, there's another great quote you have here it's actually on the conclusion. It says, "It's a fatal mistake to see a supervolcano as a pendulum swing and not as a paradigm shift." And then down the road you say, "As every volcanic eruption has made clear, another world is possible." I love this. And even when you were saying, we're not moving because we're living in the kingdom, right? I love that. Even as you have some predictions here, or I don't know if necessarily call them predictions, that's kind of what they felt to me right after you said that about the pendulum swing. You have about 18 propositions of things that might happen in the future, right? But one of them, it says, besides influenza, new plagues could spread to slay whole populations, from new zoonotic viruses like SARS and AIDS to viral infections that come from animals like avian flu. Epidemics and pandemics are endemic wildcards. I mean, and you have listed some others. But in light of, writing this book, I don't know, are you a little bit prophetic, or is it kind of like, what's his name, the Microsoft guy that in 2015 he was saying, no, we got to be careful with viruses and all this sort of stuff. And after the pandemic kind of hit the US, everybody's talking about Bill Gates, right, with his TED Talk and how he was right. How do you feel like, what are some of the points where you feel like you're completely right and it's happening right now?
Well, I don't know if you got to the quote where in the book where I talk about that there will come a time when China will catch a virus, a flu, and it will sneeze and spread to the whole world. And I had no idea that when that book was being published, actually it was published late last year, that it was actually happening. But partly, COVID-19 is a form of SARS. It is and it did come from these wet markets, and it is this is only one of many. We're living in a culture now where everything is so connected, Beto, that we're talking about it. The norm of the future is going to be this pandemic consciousness. I think if I were going to call the generation of our kids right now that are growing up right now, I call them the lockdown generation. The lockdown is going to shape them in so many ways we don't appreciate, and their mentality, their orientation towards other people, their relationships. It's a lockdown generation, and that's going to be part of the mission field to which we are called. But what I do is actually it's called semiotics, and it's a biblical word where Jesus had a favorite saying: "Red sky in morning, sailors take warning; red sky at night, sailors delight." And then he said, "You know how to read the signs of the sky. I want you to know how to read the signs of the times." And the Greek word for sign there is semeia, where we get the word semiotic. So it's the ability to read signs. And I have doctoral programs that I offer, a THD program, a DMin program in semiotics, and teaching kind of pastors and scholars how to do this, how to read the signs and connect the dots. And there was a whole tribe that was known for this. This is called the tribe of Issachar, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And if you look at 1 Chronicles 12, verse 32, as each tribe is coming to the new King David and saying, you're getting ready for battle, and this is the gifts that we offer you. The tribe of Issachar came, and they said, "We are the tribe of Issachar. We are the tribe that knows the times and knows what to do." Ooh. And so semioticians or semiotics is not enough just to know the times. And that's a huge enough challenge in and of itself. But then to go beyond and be the strategist, and this is what we can do to know what to do. So what I try to do in this book is it's really a book of semiotics. And this is how you read the signs. Anybody can do this. I mean, I called Trump's victory one of the first people to call it. Everybody got so mad at me. That part of semiotics is you don't say what you want. You say, this is what I'm reading, and then people get mad at you. Well, yeah, but we don't want that. Well, I'm just telling you. I'm not saying I want it either. I'm just telling you this is what it looks like is going to happen. So you get in a lot of trouble because you're calling things and people don't like what you're calling. I don't like it either. I didn't like the fact that I called that we're going to be living 21st century is going to be a pandemic century. But that's just the reality, and you got to call it as God has given you the ability to see it. And I think that anybody can do this if you just have the training and have the discipline to read the signs and connect the dots. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm doing something that I think everybody can do. So if you call it prophetic, then I'm talking about the prophetichood of all believers. It's not just the priesthood of all believers. We're all priests, but we're all prophets too, and anybody can do this. It's not just certain people are gifted. I think this is something that everybody is called to do themselves, is to exercise their own prophethood, their own prophetic skills and ability. So that's what I'm doing here.
Wow, that's so good. Beware what bears the name progress. That's another quote you have there. This is so good. And then, when you talk about the church in the future, you say the church in the future, and now I'm paraphrasing, it's not going to be recognized just by left or right, but rather by, backwards or forward. And as I think of the future, as I think of the church moving forward, and I love another phrase you said somewhere in there, you know, the church needs to engage rather than try to avoid the future.
Yeah.
And in page 183, you said, Jesus wants to bring us rapture experience, the rapture of being fully alive, the rapture of Jesus taking up residence inside each of us and becoming part of who we are. Jesus did not come to deliver us from our humanity, but to recover and discover our true humanity. I love that quote. I think that's totally what the future is, right? And I think Mark Chirona in the very last pages, he says something similar, that it's like Jesus is calling us from the future into the future. We're not to live in the past. We learn from the past, but really the only future, and this is almost a tagline I have here for the podcast, the only future there is hope.
Yeah,
and it was showcased through Jesus. Can you, I mean, when you talk about the future, the rapture, the 22nd century, the sign of the times, how do you feel about, you know, like all these ideas that I don't necessarily know what you think of? When I grew up and, you know, learning about the Bible and things like that, you know, the apocalypse, there's going to be an imminent end of times, you know, so are we in the end times? The rapture of the church, things like that. Where do you fit, or where do you see yourself playing out in all of that, in, you know, as it relates to the future?
Yeah, well, there's so many ways to answer that. But one is, first of all, the word apocalypse literally means unveiling. It's a lifting of the curtain. So everybody ought to be apocalyptic in that sense, that we all ought to be looking for the revealing and the unveiling and lifting of the curtain to see what God is doing and where God is moving and what God is up to. So we all ought to be in some way apocalyptic. Doesn't mean Armageddon. That's a whole other conversation. But apocalyptic literally means we're always looking for that unveiling, for that revealing, for that manifestation of what the Spirit is up to. And so in that, I'm very apocalyptic. I love that word rapture. You know, I grew up kind of a premillennial, pre-trib person. Some of you may have no idea what I'm talking about, but I was expecting that Jesus Christ was going to come at any minute and was going to take the saint and leave everybody else behind to deal with the 7-year tribulation. And so we were looking for that rapture. And you know, I was expecting that rapture at any moment. Even as a little kid, I get home from school and my mother wasn't there. I start sweating after about 20 minutes because I was the oldest and I knew my brothers weren't going, you know. And so I was the oldest, and I knew my mother was going, but I wasn't sure I was going, and I knew they weren't going. So if I was left behind, I was going to have to take care of them, and you know. So, but I love that word rapture because this is really what Jesus gives us. He doesn't rapture us from the world, but he promises to rapture us for the world, and that in the world we can experience the rapture and the joy of being alive in Christ. And there's an old there's an old kind of test quiz joke, but did Jesus know everything? Does Jesus know everything? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that, of course, is no. Jesus himself said that he did not know the date of his return. So if even Jesus doesn't know, he said that's hidden in the Father. So if even Jesus didn't know the date of his return, we got to be faithful till he comes. Maranatha is that Aramaic word, but it literally means in all three tenses, and this is huge, Beto, it means Christ has come, Christ is here now, he is come now, and he is to come. So we live a Jesus who has come, who is present now, and who will one day return and will come. And so those three tenses, we live all at the same time. We live past, present, and future all at the same time. And that's the power of that word, Maranatha, that Aramaic word. that it actually, and it closes the Bible in Greek, come Lord Jesus. But it really means Christ has come, Christ is come, and Christ is coming. And so I live, and I think all of us are called to live out of the past, not in the past, but we're to live in the present, but we're to live for the future. And the primary time zone in which we find Jesus, and this is the quote that you're talking about, is he does push us from the past, but even more, he pulls us from the future because he is already there. He is already in this future, calling us to join him in this jubilee that he has come to prepare a place for you. And he's preparing this place, this new heaven and this new earth in which we are all being called to enter and join him. So it's a very hopeful and exciting gospel. And we were not meant to escape the world. We were meant to engage the world and engage it with the rapturous love of Jesus.
So good. So good. One of my favorite songwriters, his name is John Foreman, and he has a band called Switchfoot from San Diego. He's got a song called New Way to Be Human. And I think it's almost like this idea, right, of the future is the one true humanity of who we are supposed to be.
Right.
And I think sometimes we confuse that future of the true humanity of Christ with the future of technology, of what we can do with our hands that seems so new. So, I mean, and it's pretty cool, right? To have phones, to have the ability to, like, right now be sitting in front of a computer and have conversations. And we call that future, right? We call Tesla the future. We call technology the future. And I love one of the when you talk about nanotechnology, and this is just kind of funny because you say one of the 100 fastest computers in the world sits in a desk drawer on the 5th floor of an office building in Bristol, England. And I just had a talk a few weeks ago with the mayor of Bristol, England. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Yeah, and he made some like really, really incredible quotes. It's like 2 episodes back. But in this chapter, you talk about, the largest cab service owns no vehicle. That's Uber. The largest hotel chains owns no hotel, Airbnb. The largest social media outlet generates no content, which is Facebook. And sometimes we think that's the future, right? Because it's what we can see, it's almost like what we can touch, what makes us move on the inside. And even as we go to one of the last pages in your, what I said is kind of like the predictions, you talk about maybe the possibility of a cyber attack, that it's caused by one person, because now so much power sits at the hands of one person owning a company, right? And we had what is his name? Jeff Bezos, who became like the first trillionaire in the history of humankind a few months ago or so. And imagine he says, you know what? I'm tired of Amazon. I think I'm going to shut it down. What's going to happen, right? I mean, luckily, I mean, that wouldn't be a cyber attack, but maybe it's a cyber attack on people's anxiety to be able to buy things. But just so phenomenal, man. When I read the book, and there's so much, I think it was Mark Chirona or you talking to Mark Chirona, and you said, how can I turn this book to be a book of hope and not just an anxiety read, about all these issues that might happen or that are already happening. And I think that's the beauty that you're saying of Jesus coming in the picture. What would be an invitation maybe for people who are, even like you say in your book, the duns, the nuns, the agnostics, what would be an invitation for them to see this future in a different light, maybe that they haven't?
Well, I'm all about seeing Jesus, and that's for me the key to navigating the future is you got to keep him as your North Star. You got to keep your whole compass set on Christ, and he becomes the GPS, the God's positioning system. And so as long as I follow him, I mean, the scriptures say, if Christ be lifted up, he will draw all people to him. So I'm just about lifting up Christ and calling people to his beauty, his glory. And you're so right. I appreciate you picking this up, because you got this, is that Jesus did not die on the cross to make us into a new kind of Christian. He did not die on the cross even to make us into a better kind of Jew. Jesus is the last Adam who came to do what the first Adam couldn't do. That's what the human one means. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what the Son of Man means. It means the human one. So Jesus is there to show us how to be the original human. So we are all about, Jesus is all about showing people what it means to be human. And we made it showing people what it means to be Christian. Well, Jesus didn't found the Christian religion. We did that to Jesus. Was not a Christian. We did that to him. Jesus was the last Adam, showed us how to be the original humans that God made us to be. And so it's all about this new humanity and calling us to our true humanity and dying on the cross to show us what it means to be fully, wholly, truly, divinely. And that's the paradox here, is that you can't be human without the divine. The human was the one that got God's breath breathed into us. So for us to be human, you need the divine. And that's where this culture doesn't get the complexity here. It's very simple, actually, that in order for you to be the human that God made you to be, you need the divine. You need that divine breath. You need the Spirit, not just any spirit, but the Spirit of God. So the challenge is not how do we make more Christians in the future, but how do we lift up Christ? I want to be a Jesus human. He's the fullest expression of what it means to be human. And he showed us how to be human. And he is the one way to that humanity. So I want to be a Jesus human, and I want to help others to see what it means to be a Jesus human. And if you really want to be human, Jesus is your best shot. So just, lift him up. That's all I try and do, is just lift him up. And then in lifting him up, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in us, in our communities. And it's all about that beauty for me, the beauty of Christ. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me.
So good. Yeah, I want to wrap it up with this quote. It says, "The church of the future must have a high toleration threshold and forgiving spirit for waywardness and wrongness." I think the beauty of Jesus is that in that humanity that he's calling us into, it seems like forgiveness is the key. It's almost like the opening door to his kingdom, and it's so hard to see sometimes.
Absolutely.
But I love this quote, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, you really hit on the key here. Is it is all about forgiveness and mercy. I mean, we're to Micah 6:8. Let's get it right. We're to act justly, but we're to love mercy and to walk humbly. Those three things are Jesus. He always acted justly, but he didn't love justice. He loved mercy. I mean, one day we're going to stand for our Maker and we're going to say, "Hey, Lord, give me justice. I love justice, so now it's my turn. Give me justice." I don't, at least not me. I'm going, "Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy." No, it's all about that spirit of mercy and forgiveness. And that's why this cancel culture is so not Christ. I mean, and I don't worry about it, because cancel culture will cancel out. I mean, it'll cancel. So it'll cancel itself. But it is all, if you don't get forgiveness and you don't get just the mercy that everybody needs to receive from each other, and just a little patience and graciousness and generosity of spirit. That's where Jesus is, and that's what I'm looking forward to seeing in you, Beto, and those that you're influencing. And that's why I'm here with this podcast, is that Jesus spirit. We so need that Jesus spirit.
Wow. So good. And it's alive and well. Like you said, Maranatha, it's here. I just want to close with this. What's next for you? Do you have any... Are you working on the other 25 volcanoes that didn't get published? What's going to be for the future? Are we expecting a new book soon, or a recap? Or
yeah, on September 1, a new book is coming out. One of my doctoral students is head of the Fresh Expressions movement in the U.S. that started in Britain. And so I wrote 2 volumes with him. The first one is kind of more the theoretical. It's called Contextual Intelligence. How do you increase your CQ, your contextual intelligence? We know what IQ is, we know what EQ is, but this is how do you read your context better, and how do you develop a contextual intelligence? So
good.
That's coming out. That's what it's called, Contextual Intelligence. And then in, I think, February, March of next year, the second volume, which is more of the exercises, the apps, the practices, the kind of things that you can do, the workbook will be coming out. So that's the very next book, is called Contextual Intelligence.
So good.
It should be out the 1st of September.
Love it. I'll be looking forward to those. And do you have any place where you want to point people to? I know you do. You said you do like this semiotic trainings.
Yeah, but I'm trying to help people to read the Bible, not as points and principles, but as a story, as one story, as I put it, from Genesis to the maps. It's one story. And so I do a preachthestory.com, and it's a website, preachthestory.com. And every week I have a vlog where I show people how to read the Bible narratively, and all during the week I post quotes and ideas for them to use. So, and then they can follow me on Facebook, Len Sweet. I post something every day for people to, for their illumination and inspiration, and for pastors to use in their sermons. So those 2 things, probably Facebook, Len Sweet, and then preachthestory.com. And there's also a Facebook page for Preach the Story too.
Love it. And I also want to just recommend to people that are listening, the Rings of Fire is just so good. We cover a few of the items, but there's just so much. When you guys read it, you're going to be just wowing yourselves page after page, because it's so good. And I want to thank you, Leo, again for having this time here together, for sitting across a virtual table and talking about your book, talking about the future.
I've enjoyed the sobremesa so much. Thank you.
Sobremesa. All right.
Thanks for the sobremesa.
Love it. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right.
Bye.
You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Christian Podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with friends and family. Make sure you subscribe and leave a positive review wherever you can. You can also visit christianpodcast.com to learn more about our show. Hasta la vista.